Hi, Mike King, realnewsandhistory.com, and welcome to episode number 4 of the Rise and Fall of the New World Order Cabal. Be sure to check out all the links below in the master page so you can watch this series in chronological order. Share this video as far as wide and as possible, and hit the thumbs up button for me. Thank you. And now we're going to talk today about the Illuminati and the French Revolution, and a little bit about what was going on in the young United States during the late 1700s. But first, I want to back up just a little bit. 1744, Empress Maria Theresa of Austria expels the Jews from Prague, that's in modern-day Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, or the Czech Republic, rather, and also the kingdoms of Bohemia and Moravia. So that's Empress Maria Theresa, okay? And this is very relevant to what we're going to talk about today for two reasons. First of all, it further confirms and illustrates the history, the bad blood that existed between the Catholic and Christian monarchs of Europe for centuries and the Jewish moneylenders. It's also going to tie into the French Revolution because many years later, her daughter, one of her youngest daughters, Marie Antoinette, becomes the Queen of France. Okay? So, upon issuing her expulsion order, here's what Empress Maria Theresa had to say about the Jews, the Jewish moneylenders in particular. Henceforth, no Jew, no matter under what name, will be allowed to remain here without my written permission. I know of no other troublesome pest within the state than this race, which has impoverished the people by their fraud, usury, and money lending, and commits all deeds which an honorable man despises. Subsequently, they have to be removed and excluded from here as much as possible. You see, the historical so-called persecution of the Jews in Europe never had anything to do with religion or theology or bitterness over Jesus having been crucified, anything like that. It always came back to the money lending problem. Other issues too, such as the poisoning of wells, and there were cases of children kidnapped and killed ritually, stuff like that. But mainly, it always comes back to the money and the lending of money at compound usurious interest rates, ruining people. Speaking of which, 1763, the House of Rothschild is established in Frankfurt, Germany. And that's the patriarch, Meyer Amschel Rothschild. He's even got his own coat of arms. And that's the original home in Frankfurt, in the Jewish quarter of Frankfurt. I actually shared a house with the Schiffs at one point, the Rothschilds did. Jacob Schiff, one of the early forces behind establishing the Federal Reserve in the United States. We'll talk about that later on. So that's the start of it. And right away, he's making money year after year, decade after decade, compounding his wealth with compound interest. It's only later on when his 5 sons branch out that they really become the dominant players, the force, the head of the cabal in Europe. May 1st, 1776, a German professor named Adam Weishaupt establishes the secret order of the Illuminati. That's why communists celebrate May Day today, by the way, May 1st. And he recruits some of his best and brightest students from well-connected families and begins growing the organization. At one point, the Illuminati has several thousand members throughout Europe. They begin infiltrating Freemasonry, recruiting from there. And the objective of the Illuminati is nothing less than a one-world government. And back then, the European empires were so vast. If you captured Europe, you pretty much by default captured the rest of the world. Okay, but that was the objective of the Illuminati, a secret society. That's not how he presented it to its potential recruits. They didn't come out and say, hey, we're going to take over and enslave the planet and worship the devil. Are you in? No, it doesn't go like that. It's much more subtle, and the appeal is utopian. Present themselves as benefactors of humanity, but this is how we have to operate for now in secret. Two contemporaries, or actually individuals after the French Revolution, who wrote about this extensively, were Professor John Robison of Scotland, a great philosopher and scientist. He's the inventor of the siren, and also the Abbé Barel, a French cleric. They describe in great detail how the Illuminati and that sort of thinking was behind the organization and the execution of the French Revolution. There's Professor John Robison there, okay? And the title of his book was Proofs of a Conspiracy Against All of the Monarchies and Religions of Europe. And that's the Abbé Barel. And in a nutshell, the argument is this, that Jews, Freemasons, and Illuminati wish to demolish all of the monarchies of Europe, plus the Vatican, and establish a one-world republic. Now, so that's the prelude and the build-up to the French Revolution. Eventually, the Illuminati is discovered, and they are disbanded. And the Freemasons are also banned. This is in Bavaria, the Kingdom of Bavaria. Now, what I've just told you, and essentially what Robison has said, is that's something which establishment historians, I call them the fake historians, they will actually concede that. Illuminati was real, and they did have these objectives. They can't deny that because there's receipts for that. But they then argue that after it was disbanded, it did not reconstitute itself. Only conspiracy theorists say that. Well, that's kind of ridiculous. I mean, you're going to have a massive long-term conspiracy like that. Of course, they're going to reorganize themselves, even if it's not under the name Illuminati. It came back, and it's clearly evident. You see their fingerprints all over the French Revolution. And like even today, when you see these like celebrities do the thing with the one eyeball and the pyramid, that's all Illuminati stuff. So, but it's important to note, and I don't know if Robison himself fully appreciated that it wasn't so much the Illuminati, but something above it. And that's the main cabal. Because a guy like Weishaupt, he's typically people who are front and center like that, they're working for somebody. So who's the money and the power behind the Illuminati, or who was? Cabal bankers for sure. Was Rothschild involved at that time? Was he big enough? Maybe, maybe not. But the important thing to understand is just because the organization was outlawed, it doesn't mean that this movement went away. Anything but. It only intensified and grew as the decades passed. Now let's fast forward to the French Revolution, which people typically, well, symbolically, let's say symbolically, it begins with the storming of the Bastille, July 14, 1789. Okay? That's the image right there. So, as the story goes, a bunch of disenchanted, disenfranchised, disillusioned peasants stormed the Bastille, freed the prisoners. There's only a handful of prisoners. They were going there for weapons. French Revolution didn't come from the peasantry. It came from an elite class of conspirators. We're going to get into that. But to this day, Bastille Day is celebrated in France. There you see the fireworks by the Eiffel Tower. It's the equivalent of their 4th of July. But that's really not the start of revolution. I say symbolically because it wasn't until later that year that something occurred which really began the process of politically transforming France, first into a constitutional monarchy from an absolute monarchy, and then into a form of oligarch Jacobin democracy. Okay, but the first political transition happens in October 1789. The key event is something called the Women's March on Versailles. Now that sounds familiar, don't it? The Women's March. Where have we heard that before? Well, you remember 2017, shortly after Trump was inaugurated. All of these nasty leftist hags, they put the vagina hats on and they're protesting. And Madonna's talking about how she dreams of blowing up the White House. You remember that? It's called the Women's March. Well, the name, the terminology comes from the Women's March on Versailles. That's not by coincidence because this is all one long continuation. There it is, the Women's March on Versailles. And what that was about was, as the fairy tale goes, hungry women who were disgusted at the price of bread at the market. They decided to start a protest, and they grabbed pitchforks and they were going to march on Versailles. Versailles is where King Louis and Queen Marie Antoinette were based. It's about 12 miles or so out of Paris. So they were going to march onto Versailles, and as they marched, people from other towns joined, and there was thousands and thousands of women. The Women's March of Versailles. Now, by the time they got to Versailles, it's like a mob of 40,000 people. Most of them are men. A lot of them are provocateurs, and they're armed. Robison describes in his book, Proofs of a Conspiracy, in the chapter on the French Revolution, how this thing was all orchestrated. It was a rent mob, just like today's color revolutions. And the big money bags, one of them was the Duc d'Orleans. He was an aristocrat, but he was an Illuminati Freemason. And all these people had coins in their pockets. He funded it. Just like today's mass movements. Paid. It was phony. It was just to put this public relations scheme to put all the women out front, hungry mothers protesting. But it was an Illuminati rent-a-mob. And they made it to the palace where the king and queen were, and they were terrified that this mob was going to kill them. But eventually they came out on the balcony and they would address the mob, and they agreed to return to Paris. That was one of the demands. You have to be stationed in Paris. You're too far detached from reality over here. You got to come back to Paris. So everybody marched back to Paris. The king, the queen, the mob, they all went back to Paris. And it was at that moment in history, the absolute monarchy was transformed into a constitutional monarchy. So King Louis had to share power with the parliament. Just like with the Glorious Revolution in England that we talked about in episode 2. And that's the trick. And this is going to replay itself so many times in the coming century and a half. We're going to get into that. The game always was, you have the parliamentarians demand that the king give up absolute power and share power with the people. And then gradually, these parliamentarians are controlled by the Cabal. A lot of them are scoundrels. They acquire more and more and more power until they reach a point where they're able to tell the king, get out of town. We're a democracy now. So that's how the game works. But France now becomes a constitutional monarchy. And King Louis is essentially trapped in Paris, and he's got to listen to these deputies and these revolutionaries and these Jacobins. They're pretty much dictating how they want the country run. Okay? Now, after a couple years of this, the powers of Europe begin to wage war on France. And the reason for that is they don't want this Jacobinism, Illuminati stuff, and this revolutionary business spreading to their countries, because in all the countries of Europe you had the Illuminatis and the Freemasons. So they sought to put this down. And the most prominent at that time, in the beginning of what would be 7 coalition wars against France, was the Emperor of Austria, because his sister is Marie Antoinette, and he fears for her life. So that's the first war. In 1792, France actually declares the war against Austria because of this hostility directed at revolutionary France. But there will be 7 coalition wars from 1792 all the way up to 1815 until Napoleon's final defeat in Waterloo. And it's all because the other monarchies want France to go back to a monarchy and put one of the Bourbon family back on the throne. So that there shows all of the various kingdoms of Europe, which at one time or another over that span waged war against revolutionary France. Now, in 1791, actually this precedes those wars, but it's important to mention because this was really the beginning of the end of the monarchy. King Louis and Marie Antoinette, they make a break out of Paris, and they head for the French town of Varennes. They weren't going to leave the country. They just wanted to be away from Paris not surrounded by these radicals and these Jacobins and these parliamentarians telling him what to do, and also for the safety of his family, because at any time they could kill these people. So that's known as the flight to Varennes. They tried to make it out of there. But the plot was discovered, and they were apprehended, and the parliamentarians were really pissed. So they made him go back to Paris at the Tuileries Palace. Only this time now, he's essentially under house arrest after trying to leave like that. And then they just dissolved the monarchy altogether. When they discover, they allege, it's probably true, that King Louis and Queen Marie Antoinette were conspiring with the Austrians to help them in the war. They wanted to get back on the throne. So King Louis is charged with treason. After the palace is stormed, he's apprehended. He's imprisoned. That's King Louis XVI, to be precise. And he is beheaded in January of 1793. And then later on in October, Marie Antoinette is herself beheaded. So the Jacobin radicals got a twofer out of that deal. They got to kill the king and queen of France. But the higher powers are also taking a bit of revenge against Maria Theresa, who evicted them, the Jewish moneylenders. Now they killed her daughter, the Queen of France. Marie Antoinette was also charged with treason. And they charged her with having sex with her 10-year-old son. I mean, that's the kind of fake news they would put out back then. And these simpleton peasant normies would believe it. That's how they would incite the population. They also said that Marie Antoinette said that let the poor people eat cake. She never said that. That's all invented. That was all a smear. By the way, regarding the economic crises which brought about the revolution, a few things I should mention. One, the monarchy went into debt in large measure fighting the French and Indian War, but also the American Revolution. They joined the American Revolution. And they had to take out loans to pay the debt. It's also said there was a severe grain shortage that year. Now, some of the quote-unquote conspiracy theorists who've analyzed that era have come to the conclusion that some of the economic crisis was due to sabotage. Because you've got these powerful Freemasons and connected Illuminati. They're in a position where if they want, they could choke an economy or exacerbate things. It's also been said that there was plenty of grain, but it didn't make it to market. So I wouldn't put it past these people to make the population go hungry just so you could get them more angry at the monarchy. But that's the important point to consider. You know, they teach the history of the French Revolution as the people couldn't take it anymore. They rose up. Now, it was the elites overthrowing the elites. It was the elite cabal overthrowing the monarchs and the aristocracy. Now, this thing really starts to take a bloody, insane, almost satanic turn. There is such a bloodlust, so many people being killed. Counter-revolutionaries, they call them. About 3,000 would end up, the heads chopped off, the guillotine. About 50,000 in all probably were killed by firing squad. 250,000 dead as a result of the Civil War. Many people died in prison. It was very bloody. And one of the most outrageous, psychotic killers was this Jacobin, Robespierre. Eventually, the revolution started to eat its own. They turned on Robespierre, and other revolutionaries cut his head off because they were afraid he was going to go after them. So after they got rid of the king, now they start turning on each other for power, faction on faction. It was really a sick, depraved, bloody, satanic bloodlust just to kill people for a period of years. However, there were, within the country, within the revolution itself, there were more moderate elements who really didn't want to overthrow civilization itself. They really took to heart the idea of liberty, fraternity, equality, which sound like noble ideals, and they are. But for the really bloodthirsty Jacobin radicals, those were just slogans used to attract normies. Okay. But there was a moderate, sensible element that was opposed to monarchy, but really was also opposed to these Jacobin bloody revolutionaries. 1796 to 97, Napoleon really cements his stature as the war hero of France. He had won many battles, but he has a very successful campaign in Italy, fighting against the Austrians in the Kingdom of Sardinia and what were known as the Papal States. This makes him like a demigod. You know how people love their war heroes like Patton and Douglas MacArthur and Andrew Jackson. That's just the way it goes. You win battles, you become a hero. So he's big now. And he is not one of these crazy Jacobins either. We're going to talk about him later on, and especially in the next episode. But to wrap up the French Revolution, this is from John Robeson's 1798 book. The Illuminati had no other object. They counted all princes as usurpers and tyrants. They intended to establish a government of morality, as they called it. They meant to abolish the laws which protected property accumulated by long-continued and successful industry. They were anti-private property, anti-inheritance rights, just like Karl Marx many years later. They intended to establish universal liberty and equality, or at least they pretended all this. And as necessary preparations for this, they intended to root out all religion and ordinary morality, and even to break the bonds of domestic life by destroying the veneration for marriage vows and by taking the education of children out of the hands of the parents. This was all that the Illuminati could teach, and this was precisely what France has done. Illuminati were extreme leftists. They were the woke libtards of their day, and they destroyed France. But now things are about to get better in France. A level of sanity is about to return. In 1799, that war hero, Napoleon, returns, and he overthrows the Directory. The Directory had taken over from the Jacobins. I mean, they were still a leftist bunch of loudmouth parliamentarians. And he basically just shows up and says, get lost, I'm in charge now, just like that. He's going to restore order out of the chaos. And I wrote a book on Napoleon. You see the cover there. It's titled Napoleon versus the Old and New World Orders. Because he wasn't going to bring the monarch back. He wasn't going to bring back a Bourbon king. At the same time, he wanted nothing to do with these crazy Jacobin, atheist, whacked out destroyers. He was not an Illuminati. So, but that he will be the focus of our next episode, Napoleon Bonaparte. Same year now, Nathan Rothschild arrives in England. He sets up his business enterprises. In very short order, he's going to be the big money bags of England. So we now have, in 1799, the rise of the House of Rothschild in London and the rise of Napoleon. They parallel each other, and ultimately they're going to become enemies. Now I want to skip back across the pond and talk about what's going on in the United States, the young United States. In Washington is the first president. In his first term, early on, there's a big controversy in his own cabinet. We can call this the first bank war. His Secretary of Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, wants to establish a central bank modeled on the Bank of England, privately owned. Thomas Jefferson, Secretary of State, is dead set against it. Hamilton says debts are good. Jefferson's debts are bad. Ultimately, Hamilton prevailed, and the first central bank in the United States, called the First Bank of the United States, in Philadelphia, is established with a 20-year charter. It is the Federal Reserve of its day. It controls the money supply. Now, interesting thing about Alexander Hamilton is, well, first of all, everybody hated him. I mean, Washington liked him probably because he served under Washington as an officer in a war. But as for the second, third, fourth, and fifth presidents of the United States, they all despised him. Adams, Jefferson, Madison, and Monroe. Now, I've got all the quotes to back it up. They all hated that son of a bitch. And it wasn't just because of political differences, primarily over the bank. But on a personal level, Hamilton was just a snobby, elitist, arrogant son of a bitch. John Adams referred to him as a tireless intriguer, conspirator. But he was the power behind the central bank. But here's what you might not know about Alexander Hamilton. Here's a book published, Princeton University Press, by a Jewish author named Andrew Porwancher. The Jewish World of Alexander Hamilton. The untold story of the founding father's likely Jewish birth and upbringing, and its revolutionary consequences for understanding him. There it is, The Jewish World of Alexander Hamilton. He was born out of wedlock, and then the mother married a Jewish fellow named Levine. He went to Hebrew school. He spoke Hebrew. Probably was raised as a Jew in bar mitzvah. If he was, he would keep that part hidden. But he wasn't even born in the United States. He was born in the British Isles, West Indies. Okay? But he was totally pro-Jewish moneylender, and a lot of his opponents said that he works for the Jewish moneylenders, but it goes deeper than that. Alexander Hamilton is actually Alexander Levine. That's a fact. So we get back to that theme now. The Jewish mafia, international moneylenders, central banks. It's going on here in the United States. It's going on in Europe. That is the essence of the New World Order cabal. He was a real scumbag. I mean, he was the one. He used to write anonymous letters under fake names in newspapers attacking people. He was the one who started the false rumor that Thomas Jefferson impregnated a slave girl when he was old. That's actually not true. The so-called DNA test is phony. There's a whole story there, how they concocted it. But he started that. He's always starting trouble with people. James Monroe, who would become the fifth president, wanted to challenge him to a duel. But Aaron Burr, a sitting vice president under Jefferson, beat him to the punch in 1804. Challenged Alexander Hamilton to a duel for slandering him, and killed him in Weehawken, New Jersey. So Alexander Hamilton is one of the true villains of American history. Yet he is the one guy who gets most of the hype. They even made that Broadway play named after Hamilton. He's on our $10 bill. But he's an arch villain of American history, definitely hooked up with this whole cabal thing that we're talking about. And finally, in 1796, Washington wraps up his 2 terms as first president of the United States, issues his famous farewell address. And I'm just paraphrasing here some of the key points. He's giving advice and warnings to the young country on how it should maintain its future liberty and prosperity. He says they maintain religion and morality as the indispensable supports of a free people. Beware of political parties. Avoid alliances and foreign military entanglements. You know, it's interesting. The revolutionaries of France asked George Washington for help. He said no. He issued a proclamation. No one is to get involved. So he was a total, quote-unquote, isolationist. And he wanted nothing to do with those Illuminati scumbags either. He knew about them, by the way. He knew the difference between sane and decent Freemasons and the Illuminatis who penetrated the Freemasonry. He was not one of them. Keep the government spending and the taxes low. Do not weaken the U.S. Constitution with amendments. And do not allow sectional differences to divide the Union. He was already foreseeing the possibility of dark forces engineering a future civil war. In Europe, in the early New World Order, the New World Order Red Crime Gang is already in operation, and eventually the globalists will attack America in each of the areas that Washington warned about. And by the way, the Jacobins, their theme color was red, and their slogans were identical to like the future communists and such. So that's it. In the next episode, we're going to pick up with Napoleon Bonaparte rescues France, builds it up, yet the monarchies continue to wage war against France. So that's all I got for today. Again, be sure to like this video, share this video, check out the links below, and I've got a master page where all of these episodes are listed in order. You'll want to watch them all in order, and check out all my books and PDFs. And please continue to support my work so I can continue to write articles, books, and do these videos. All the links are below. Thank you.